A black Maybach rolled to a stop at the far end of the Savannah waterfront. Serena Ashford stepped out and walked toward the man sitting alone at the edge of a wooden dock. His clothes were streaked with engine grease. A wrench rested against his boot. She stopped, looked down at him, and asked a simple question. "Can I sit with you?" Marcus Cole nodded without looking up. She sat beside him, watching the river. She did not know that the man she had just asked permission to sit beside had quietly wired $22 million into her foundation over the past 5 years. And tonight, everything was about to unravel. The woman who just sat down next to a grease-stained mechanic on a public dock had no idea she was sitting beside the only person keeping her entire empire from collapsing. Have you ever sat next to a stranger, completely unaware that they had already changed your life years ago? 3 weeks earlier, before the dock, before the question, before any of it, Marcus Cole lived a life no one in Savannah thought twice about. He woke at 5:15 in a small clapboard house on the banks of the Wilmington River, left a note on the kitchen table for his daughter, and drove to Thunderbolt Marina, where he ran a one-man boat repair operation out of a rented slip. His hands were good, his prices were fair. His neighbors assumed he was a divorced mechanic who had drifted south from somewhere up the coast, and Marcus never corrected them. What no one in Savannah knew was that Marcus Cole had spent 11 years as one of the most successful fund managers on Wall Street. By 32, he managed portfolios worth north of $4 billion for a boutique firm in Midtown Manhattan. His wife, Catherine, worked as a pediatrician at New York Presbyterian. She had grown up in Savannah, the daughter of a shrimper, and she understood what money could do when it reached the right hands. She kept a brass compass on her desk, a gift from her father, and she used to say that money without direction was just noise. Catherine died in a car accident on the Hutchinson River Parkway when Nora was 3 years old. Marcus buried his wife in Savannah, in the cemetery behind the church where her parents had married. Then he sold every share he owned, closed every account, walked away from every professional relationship he had built, and moved into the house on the Wilmington River. He told no one where he was going. Within 6 months of arriving in Savannah, Marcus established an anonymous philanthropic trust called the Compass Fund. The name came from Catherine's brass compass. The fund operated through a network of legal intermediaries and distributed grants to 14 nonprofit organizations across the country, all focused on children and women in crisis. The largest single recipient was the Ashford Harbor Foundation, a Savannah-based organization that ran shelters for orphan children and survivors of domestic violence. Marcus chose Ashford Harbor because its mission was the thing Catherine had talked about most in the last year of her life. "Every orphan deserves a roof that does not leak," she used to say. He intended to make sure they got one. That afternoon, Marcus picked up Nora from Garrison Elementary at 3 o'clock sharp. She was 8, quiet like her father, with her mother's dark hair and a habit of drawing everything she saw. She climbed into the truck holding a sheet of construction paper. "I drew your boat, Dad," she said, holding up a crayon sketch of a blue hull on green water. Marcus studied it seriously. "You got the waterline right," he said. Nora beamed. They stopped for ice cream on the way home and sat on the dock together, watching a pelican dive into the channel. Marcus kissed her forehead. "Everything I do is for you," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Nora nodded and went back to her cone. That night, after Nora was asleep, Marcus sat in his dark office and opened a laptop. He pulled up the quarterly financial reports for the Ashford Harbor Foundation, reports he received through his intermediaries as a condition of ongoing funding. Something had been bothering him for months. 3 construction projects funded through Compass Fund grants, shelters for children in rural Georgia, had been listed as in progress for over 2 years, but there were no progress photos, no contractor invoices, no permit filings. The numbers did not add up. He made a note in a private file and closed the laptop. He did not have enough evidence yet, but the feeling in his chest was one he recognized from his years on Wall Street, the feeling that someone, somewhere, was lying about where the money was going. Across Savannah, in a glass-walled office on the top floor of a restored cotton warehouse on River Street, Serena Ashford was building the most important night of her career. The Ashford Harbor Foundation occupied the entire 4th floor of the building, a bright open space filled with case files, donation records, and photographs of children who had passed through the foundation's 6 residential shelters. Serena had founded the organization 8 years earlier when she was 26 years old and had nothing but a business degree from Georgia State and a childhood spent in the foster care system. She had been orphaned at 4, bounced between 7 homes by the time she was 12, and aged out of the system at 18 with a duffel bag and $1,100 in savings. She built Ashford Harbor from that. The press called her the Iron Philanthropist. She did not enjoy the nickname, but she did not deny it either. The foundation's annual fundraiser, the Harbor Gala, was 3 weeks away. It was the single largest source of operating revenue each year, and this year, Serena needed it to raise $20 million to keep all 6 shelters open through the following fiscal year. The logistics alone were enormous. Venue, catering, guest lists, media coordination, and Serena managed most of it herself with the help of a small staff and one person she trusted above all others. Grant Mercer had been the foundation's chief financial officer for 6 years. He was 45, polished, deliberate, and unfailingly calm under pressure. Serena treated him like a brother. He handled every dollar that moved through Ashford Harbor, and she had never once questioned his numbers. That morning, Serena and her team drove to the Thunderbolt Marina waterfront to inspect the outdoor venue she had booked for the gala, a renovated dock pavilion overlooking the Wilmington River. When they arrived, Marcus was on his knees beside a sailboat hull, sanding a patch of fiberglass. Grant stepped out of the car, looked at Marcus, and waved his hand dismissively. "Clear your things out. This area is reserved." Marcus did not respond. He simply gathered his tools and moved to the far end of the dock. Serena glanced at him as she passed, registered nothing, and continued walking. What Serena did not see was what happened later that afternoon, behind the closed door of a rented office suite in downtown Savannah. Grant Mercer sat across from 2 men in expensive suits, representatives of a private investment group he had been working with for 3 years. The arrangement was simple. Grant created fictional construction projects under the foundation's umbrella, diverted Compass Fund grants into shell companies he controlled, and split the proceeds with his partners. Over 36 months, he had siphoned $12 million from the Ashford Harbor Foundation. He knew that a large anonymous donor existed, but he had never been able to identify who was behind the Compass Fund. As long as the money kept coming and the donor stayed invisible, Grant felt safe. That safety cracked 2 days later when Serena received an encrypted email from the Compass Fund's legal representative. The message was brief. It requested a full independent audit of the foundation's finances before the gala. Serena read it twice, frowned, and forwarded it to Grant. She agreed to the audit. She had nothing to hide. Grant read the same email standing at his desk and felt the floor tilt beneath him. 10 days before the gala, Serena held a pre-event reception at the Bohemian Hotel on the riverfront. The guest list included major donors, city officials, and a handful of regional press. It was a cocktail and schmooze affair, designed to build momentum and secure last-minute pledges. The terrace overlooked the water, and the late afternoon light made everything look gilded and important. Marcus had come to the marina that afternoon to finish a hull repair for a client whose boat was docked 2 slips down from the gala venue. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, work boots, and had grease on his forearms. He did not know the reception was happening until he walked past the terrace entrance on his way back to his truck. Grant saw him first. The CFO was standing near the bar with a group of donors when he spotted Marcus crossing the edge of the event space. He set his drink down and raised his voice loud enough for the entire terrace to hear. "Excuse me, who let you in here? This is a private event for people who actually contribute to society, not a rest stop for day laborers looking for a handout." A donor in a seersucker jacket laughed openly. 2 women near the railing exchanged a glance and shook their heads. A city councilwoman turned away as if embarrassed for everyone involved. The laughter that followed was not loud, but it was precise, the kind that told a person exactly where they stood in the room's hierarchy and that the answer was nowhere. Marcus stopped walking. He looked directly at Grant. His expression did not change. There was no anger, no humiliation, no flinch. He held the stare for 3 full seconds, long enough for Grant's smile to waver by a fraction, long enough for something in the air between them to shift, and then he turned and walked away without a word. Not quickly, not with his head down. He walked the way a man walks when he has decided that the people in front of him are not worth the breath it would take to correct them. Serena stood 6 feet from the exchange. She watched Marcus leave with the same detached indifference she might have shown a catering mishap. He was not her concern. He was not anyone's concern. She returned to her conversation without a second thought, but someone on her staff noticed what Serena missed. Joanna Price was 28, a junior accountant who had joined the foundation 4 months earlier. She had been standing near the terrace railing when Grant humiliated Marcus, and something about the way the man responded unsettled her. She had seen people absorb public insults before. They flushed, or stammered, or retreated with their shoulders curled inward. Marcus did none of those things. His stillness was not the stillness of submission. It was the stillness of someone who simply did not need to respond. After Marcus left, Joanna walked past Grant's table to retrieve a binder. Beside it, half covered by a napkin, sat a manila folder stamped in red ink. The label read, Compass Fund Confidential. Joanna glanced around, pulled out her phone, and photographed the cover before anyone noticed. 2 days after the reception, the Foundation's financial management system crashed. The server that housed donor records, grant tracking, and gala logistics went offline without warning, and the internal IT team could not restore it. Serena needed those files for the pre-gala compliance report, and without them, the audit the anonymous donor had requested could not proceed on schedule. She drove to the waterfront that afternoon to do a final walkthrough of the gala venue. Marcus was sitting alone on the dock, a laptop open in front of him. She glanced at the screen as she passed and saw rows of financial data, columns of numbers, pivot tables, formulas, not the kind of thing a boat mechanic typically worked with. She stopped. For the first time, she spoke to him directly. "You're always out here. What exactly do you do?" Marcus did not look up. "Fix boats," he said. Before she could press further, one of the gala technicians jogged over in a panic. The AV rigging, the sound system and lighting array that had been installed for the event, had gone dead. The control board was unresponsive, and the technician had already called 2 electricians, neither of whom could come before the weekend. Serena pinched the bridge of her nose. Another problem. Another delay. Marcus stood up without being asked. He walked to the control panel, mounted on the dock piling, opened the housing, studied the wiring for about 30 seconds, then reached in and began reconnecting components with a speed and precision that made the technician stop talking mid-sentence. His fingers moved through the wiring with the certainty of someone who understood systems at a structural level, not just circuits and fuses, but the logic underneath them. 4 minutes later, the entire system powered on. Lights, speakers, monitors, everything. Marcus closed the panel, wiped his hands on his jeans, and sat back down at his laptop as though he had done nothing more interesting than tie his shoe. The technician stared at him. 2 of the gala setup crew had stopped what they were doing to watch. "Where did you learn to do that?" the technician asked. Marcus looked up briefly. "I read a lot." Then he returned to his screen as though nothing had happened. The technician looked at Serena. Serena looked at Marcus. The setup crew looked at each other. No one spoke for a long moment. She did not thank him. She stood there for another minute, watching his hands on the keyboard, the way he scrolled through data with the fluency of someone who had spent years inside spreadsheets, not engine bays. There was something in the way he carried himself that did not match the flannel shirt and the grease stains. It was not arrogance. It was the absence of any need to be recognized. Then she turned and walked to her car. At the door, she glanced back once. Marcus had not moved. That evening, Serena opened her laptop at home and searched for him. She typed Marcus Cole Savannah into Google and found nothing. No LinkedIn profile, no social media accounts, no news articles, no business registrations. The man did not exist on the internet. For someone in the digital age, that kind of absence was not accidental. It was deliberate, and it made Serena more curious than anything Grant had ever shown her in a financial report. Meanwhile, inside the Foundation's offices, Grant summoned Joanna to his corner office and closed the door. He did not sit down. "I understand you've been asking questions about the Compass Fund," he said. His voice was level, almost friendly. "That account is above your clearance level. I'd recommend focusing on the work you were hired to do." Joanna nodded and left. She understood the warning. She also understood that warnings like that only came when someone had something to protect. 5 days before the gala, the crisis hit. Serena arrived at her office, to find an email from the Compass Fund's legal intermediary. The message was one paragraph long, effective immediately. All disbursements from the Compass Fund to the Ashford Harbor Foundation are suspended pending completion of the requested independent audit. No further funds will be released until the audit is concluded and results are reviewed. Serena read it 3 times. Then she pulled up the foundation's operating budget and felt the blood drain from her face. The Compass Fund accounted for 60% of the foundation's annual revenue. Without it, the gala was $8 million short of its target. 6 children's shelters, 412 kids, 209 staff members. All of it hinged on money that had just stopped flowing. For the first time in her career, Serena lost her composure in front of her team. She stood at the head of the conference table with her hands flat on the surface and told them the truth. Our primary donor has frozen funding. If we do not close the gap before gala night, we will begin shutting down shelters within 90 days. The room went silent. A program coordinator in the back row put her hand over her mouth. A case manager who had been with the foundation since its first year stared at the table and said nothing. Grant leaned forward, his expression perfectly calibrated to project concern without panic. "This anonymous donor has always been a liability," he said. "We have no relationship, no transparency, no leverage. I've been in conversation with a group called Meridian Partners. They're prepared to step in as a replacement anchor donor, potentially tonight. They understand our mission, and they're ready to move fast." His voice was steady, almost comforting. What Grant did not say was that Meridian Partners was a shell entity he controlled, and that routing gala proceeds through it would allow him to extract another $5 million before anyone noticed. Serena was weighing the offer when she found the envelope. It was sitting on her desk, unmarked, unsealed. Inside was a single printed page listing 3 construction projects the foundation had funded, projects that should have produced children's shelters in rural Georgia. Beside each project was a note in plain text: no permits filed, no contractors on record, no construction activity at listed addresses. She brought the page to Grant. He barely blinked. "Those are Phase 1 projects," he said. "They're stalled due to permitting delays with the county. Someone is feeding you disinformation to destabilize us before the gala. This is exactly why we need Meridian." Serena hesitated. Then she nodded. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. 2 days later, Joanna Price was terminated. The official reason was a violation of internal data security protocols. The real reason was that Grant had traced the Compass Fund inquiry to her workstation. He signed the termination paperwork himself and had security escort her from the building before lunch. Her desk was cleared by afternoon. Her email was deactivated within the hour. It was clean, efficient, and designed to send a message to anyone else who might be curious. Joanna found Marcus at the marina that evening. She had no particular reason to seek him out except instinct. The same instinct that had told her something was wrong when she watched him absorb Grant's insult without flinching. She sat on the dock beside him and spoke carefully. "I don't know who you are," she said, "but something is very wrong inside the Ashford Harbor Foundation, and I think you already know that." Marcus looked at her for a long time. The river lapped at the dock pilings. A shrimp boat moved slowly through the channel behind them. Then he said, "Tell me everything." That night, Marcus broke a rule he had kept for 5 years. He had always operated through intermediaries, through lawyers and trustees, and encrypted channels. He had never directly involved himself in the affairs of any organization he funded. But now there was no time for distance. He called a forensic accounting firm in Atlanta, a boutique outfit that specialized in nonprofit fraud. He retained them for an emergency 48-hour audit of the Ashford Harbor Foundation's complete financial records. The retainer was $400,000. He paid it from a personal account that had not been touched in 3 years. While the auditors worked, Marcus did his own analysis. He spent 2 nights at his kitchen table after Nora went to sleep, tracing every dollar the Compass Fund had sent to Ashford Harbor over the past 3 years. The work came back to him like muscle memory. The same pattern recognition skills that had once made him one of the best on Wall Street now turned toward a different kind of ledger. What he found was systematic and precise. Grant had created 7 shell companies registered in 3 jurisdictions: Panama, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. Through a layered series of transfers, disguised as vendor payments and contractor fees, he had moved $12.4 million out of the foundation and into accounts he controlled. There was a second phase planned. Immediately following the gala, Grant intended to route another $5 million through Meridian Partners before resigning and disappearing. Marcus copied the data onto a USB drive and gave it to Joanna. "Get this to Serena," he said. "Tell her it's from someone who cares about the foundation. Don't mention my name." Joanna took the drive. She asked no questions. Serena received the USB the next day. She held it in her hand and turned it over twice. Before she could open it, Grant appeared in her doorway. "I heard someone left you an anonymous package," he said. "Serena, think about what's happening. Someone is trying to undermine us right before the most important night of the year. Whatever is on that drive could be fabricated. Don't give them the satisfaction." Serena placed the USB in her desk drawer and closed it. That evening, Marcus came home to find Nora sitting on the porch steps with a new drawing. She held it up as he climbed out of the truck. It was two stick figures standing on a dock, a tall one and a small one, with a big yellow sun behind them. "That's us," she said. Marcus crouched down and studied it with the same seriousness he gave everything she made. "Best one yet," he said. Nora threw her arms around his neck. They cooked dinner together that night. Marcus taught her how to dice an onion, and she laughed so hard when a tomato rolled off the cutting board and onto the floor that Marcus could not help laughing too. "Are you sad, Dad?" she asked later, while they ate. Marcus shook his head. "Never sad when I've got you." After Nora fell asleep, Marcus sat alone on the back porch, the brass compass in his hand. The river was black and still. He turned the compass over, feeling the weight of it, the scratch on the glass where Catherine had dropped it once in the hospital parking lot. "I'm trying, Kath," he whispered. "I'm trying." Then he went inside, opened his laptop, and composed an email to the FBI's Atlanta field office. He attached the financial data, the shell company registrations, the transfer records, and a narrative summary of the fraud. He hit send at 11:47 p.m., 2 days before the gala. Serena finally opened the USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop expecting noise, the kind of conspiratorial garbage that angry ex-employees sometimes manufactured. Instead, she found a 46-page financial analysis that was more thorough than anything her own auditors had ever produced. Every transaction was mapped. Every shell company was named, registered, and linked to Grant Mercer through corporate filings. The money trail ran through 7 entities across 3 countries, and the total amount diverted was $12.4 million. Each entry was time-stamped, cross-referenced with the foundation's internal ledger, and annotated with source documents. Serena stared at the screen for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Grant into her office. She asked him directly about the 3 projects with no construction activity. Grant was smooth. He blamed the delays on a local contractor who had gone bankrupt, called it an unfortunate but containable situation, and promised to have a full accounting ready after the gala. "Right now, we need to focus on Saturday night," he said. "Everything else can wait." Serena let him leave. Then she got in her car and drove 40 minutes south to the address listed for one of the 3 projects, a plot of land outside Hinesville, Georgia, where a children's shelter was supposed to be under construction. She pulled off the highway and parked on a dirt road beside an empty field. There was no foundation, no framing, no equipment, no sign that anyone had ever broken ground, just red clay and scrub grass stretching to a tree line. Serena stood in the middle of the field with her hands at her sides. They were shaking. She drove back to Savannah and went straight to her office. She opened the foundation's financial system and began tracing the Compass Fund's history. For 2 hours, she followed the money backward, through intermediary accounts, through legal trusts, through routing numbers that led to a single originating entity registered in New York, and then she found the detail that stopped her cold. Every single disbursement from the Compass Fund had been executed on the same date, March 14th. She ran the date through public records and found a death notice filed in Chatham County, Georgia. Catherine Cole, age 33, pediatrician, survived by her husband, Marcus Cole, and their daughter, Nora. Date of death, March 14th. Serena pushed back from her desk and stood up so fast her chair rolled into the wall. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. The man on the dock, the man Grant had ordered to clear out, the man she had watched being humiliated at her own reception without lifting a finger, That man had been funding 60% of her life's work for 5 years. Every shelter that stayed open, every child who had a bed, every woman who found safety inside her walls, he had paid for it, and he had never once asked for his name to be known. She drove to the waterfront. Marcus was not there. The dock was empty. The wooden bench where she had asked him if she could sit was wet with evening dew, and there was no one on it. His tools were stowed, his truck was gone. She stood there, looking at the empty seat, and remembered his face when she had asked that question. "Can I sit with you?" He had nodded without looking up. Now she understood. He had known who she was the entire time. He had always known. Across town, Grant's phone rang. It was one of his partners in the Meridian group. The man's voice was tight. "Someone hired a forensic audit team out of Atlanta. They've been pulling our filings. Someone is spending serious money to take us apart." Grant hung up and sat in silence for 10 seconds. Then he opened his laptop and began deleting files. The Bohemian Hotel ballroom on Savannah's riverfront had been transformed for the Harbor Gala. Crystal chandeliers hung above tables set with white linen and low arrangements of magnolia and jasmine. 300 guests filled the room, a cross-section of Savannah's wealthiest donors, elected officials, and national media. A string quartet played near the entrance. Waiters circulated with champagne flutes. It was the kind of event that made people feel important simply for being invited. Grant Mercer stood at the podium in a custom Navy suit, delivering the keynote address. His voice carried the practiced warmth of a man who had spent years performing sincerity. He spoke about the Foundation's mission, about the children whose lives had been changed, about the shelters that stood as proof of what generosity could build. Then he paused, leaned into the microphone, and made his move. "I'm thrilled to announce that Ashford Harbor has secured a new anchor partner. Meridian Partners will be replacing our previous anonymous donor, whose recent behavior has raised concerns about reliability. Tonight marks the beginning of a stronger, more transparent chapter." Serena sat in the second row, her face expressionless. She did not applaud. Halfway through Grant's next sentence, the ballroom doors opened. Marcus Cole stepped through them. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, no cufflinks, no ornamentation of any kind. His hair was combed. His shoes were clean. He looked like a man who had put on the only suit he owned and walked into a room where he did not belong. And yet he walked with the unhurried certainty of someone who had been in rooms far more powerful than this one and had never needed anyone in them to know it. 300 heads turned. Whispers rippled across the tables. Several guests recognized him as the man from the dock, the one Grant had dismissed at the reception. A donor near the front leaned to his wife and murmured, "Isn't that the mechanic?" Grant stopped speaking. His smile tightened. "Security? Who authorized this?" He looked at Marcus with the kind of contempt that only the truly afraid can produce. "This is a private gala. You can't just—" "I invited him." Serena's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked toward the stage. Grant blinked. "Serena, this man is a boat mechanic from the marina. He has no—" Serena stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and spoke clearly enough for every person in the room to hear. "The man you just called a boat mechanic has anonymously donated $22 million to this foundation over the past 5 years. He is the Compass Fund, and he never once asked for anyone to know his name." The silence that followed was absolute. Not the silence of confusion or politeness. The silence of 300 people recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Every eye in the room moved to Marcus. He stood near the back wall, hands in his pockets, his expression unchanged. He did not wave. He did not speak. He simply stood there, the way he had stood on the dock the day Grant told him to leave. Grant recovered first, barely. "This is absurd. There is no evidence that this man—" Serena pressed a key on the laptop connected to the projection screen. The first slide appeared. It was a forensic audit summary prepared by an independent firm in Atlanta. It listed 7 shell companies, all registered to Grant Mercer, or entities he controlled. It showed $12.4 million in diverted funds, traced through Panama, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. Every transaction carried a digital signature, a timestamp, and a corresponding entry in the Foundation's internal ledger. Grant's face went white. He took a step backward, then another. His eyes moved to the exit at the far side of the ballroom. 2 men in dark suits were already standing there, credentials visible on their belts. They had been waiting since before the first guest arrived. Grant turned back to the room, his composure crumbling. His voice rose. "You don't know what you're talking about. This foundation would have been bankrupt years ago if it weren't for me. I kept the lights on. I made the deals. Marcus walked forward. He did not rush. He moved through the parted crowd the way a man moves when he has already made his decision and is simply arriving at the place where it will be carried out. He stopped 10 feet from the podium and spoke for the first time. His voice was low, steady, and carried without effort. "Every dollar I sent has a log. Every project you claim to build, I visited in person. 7 addresses, 7 empty lots, not a single brick." He opened a laptop on the nearest table and projected a new set of images onto the screen. GPS-tagged photographs of 7 locations, each one corresponding to a project Grant had reported as under construction. Empty fields, abandoned warehouses, overgrown lots with no sign of any foundation work. The metadata on each photograph showed the date, the coordinates, and the device used. They were unalterable. Grant pointed at Marcus, his hand trembling. "Who are you? You're nobody. You're some anonymous. I'm Catherine Cole's husband." Marcus's voice did not rise. She was a pediatrician. She spent her career taking care of other people's children. Her one wish was that every orphan would have a home that didn't fall apart around them. "You took that wish and turned it into a bank account." No one in the room spoke. A woman in the third row pressed her napkin to her eyes. A city councilman set his champagne glass down and did not pick it up again. The string quartet had stopped playing. 300 people sat in a silence so complete that the sound of the river outside the windows became audible. Grant's mouth opened and closed. He looked around the room for a single sympathetic face and found none. The donors who had laughed at his jokes 20 minutes earlier would not meet his eyes. The politicians who had shaken his hand were staring at their plates. The 2 FBI agents walked forward. One of them addressed Grant by his full legal name and informed him that he was under arrest on federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Grant tried to pull away, a single reflexive jerk of his arm, but the agent's grip held firm. His hands were placed behind his back. The handcuffs clicked in a ballroom that was so quiet the sound carried to the last row. He was led past the tables, past the champagne, past the silent faces of every person he had deceived, and through the ballroom doors. They closed behind him with a soft thud that felt like a period at the end of a sentence. As Grant was led toward the exit, Serena turned back to the laptop. She opened a second file, one Marcus had not shown her, one the auditors had assembled from federal financial records. The Compass Fund had not only funded Ashford Harbor, it had funded 13 other organizations across the country. Schools for children with disabilities in Tennessee, women's shelters in Ohio and Maryland, community health programs in rural Alabama, a literacy initiative in West Virginia. The total amount donated across all 14 organizations over 5 years was $87 million. Not one recipient had ever known the donor's name. Serena read the number on the screen and felt the weight of it settle into her chest. $87 million. 5 years. 14 organizations, and the man behind all of it had been sitting on a dock in work boots, letting people call him a day laborer, and never once correcting them. She turned to find Marcus. He had already left the stage. He was standing in the far corner of the ballroom, alone, his back near the wall, watching the room the way he watched the river from his dock, quietly, from a distance, as though none of it had anything to do with him. The morning after the gala, the Savannah waterfront was quiet. The bunting and lighting rigs were still in place, but the tables and chairs had been cleared. The river moved slowly under a pale sky, and the air smelled like salt and wet wood. A heron stood motionless at the edge of the channel, watching the current with the patience of something that had nowhere else to be. Marcus was at the dock by 6, kneeling beside a center console that needed new spark plugs. He had changed back into his work clothes. His hands were already dirty. The events of the previous night might as well have happened to someone else. He had not checked his phone. He had not read the news. He had made Nora breakfast, driven her to school, and come to the marina, the same way he did every morning. He heard footsteps on the planks before he saw her. Serena walked toward him carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She was not wearing heels, no jewelry, a plain jacket over a cotton shirt, no entourage, No car idling at the curb. She stopped a few feet from where he was working and stood there, holding the cups, saying nothing. The river moved behind them. Neither of them seemed to notice. After a while she spoke. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Marcus did not look up. He tightened a plug with a socket wrench, wiped his hands on a rag, and answered without turning around. "Because it was never about who gave it. It was only ever about who received it." Serena sat down beside him. The same spot, the same dock, the same bench where she had asked weeks ago if she could sit. This time she did not ask. She just sat. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the water, saying nothing, needing nothing said. 1 week later, construction began on the first real children's shelter, funded by recovered assets and a wave of new donations that had poured in after the gala. Serena supervised the site herself, arriving each morning before the crew. Marcus showed up on the third day. He came not as a donor, not as a name on a plaque, but as a volunteer. He spent the afternoon installing bookshelves in the reading room, measuring and cutting and fitting each one with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. Late in the afternoon, Nora arrived. She had been at school, and a neighbor had dropped her off at the site. She walked into the reading room carrying a new box of crayons and sat down in the corner without being told. She opened the box, selected a blue crayon, and began to draw. A dock, a boat, 2 people sitting side by side, looking out at the water. She looked up and saw Serena standing in the doorway. Nora smiled. "Do you want to draw with me?" Serena glanced at Marcus. He gave a small nod, so slight it was almost invisible. Serena sat down beside Nora. The 3 of them were in a room that still smelled like fresh-cut lumber, each one carrying a silence of their own, but sharing the same roof. No declaration, no promise, just presence, the simple, undeniable fact of being in the same place at the same time and meaning it. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus Cole was not sitting alone. Neither of them had been looking.